The phone rang 3 times before Clara Bennett answered it, her hands still damp from washing dishes in the cramped kitchen she shared with her younger brother. "Miss Bennett," the voice on the other end said, clipped and businesslike, "the Whitfield family is prepared to interview you today, not next week. If you cannot come within 2 hours, the position goes to someone else." Clara's stomach tightened. 2 hours. She looked at the stack of unpaid bills sitting on the counter, the eviction notice tucked beneath a chipped mug, and she did not hesitate. "I'll be there," she said. She hung up and stood still for a moment, her heart pounding harder than it should have for a simple job interview. But this was not a simple job. The Whitfield family was known across the city. Old money, older secrets, and a household that had gone through 4 caregivers in the past year alone. Nobody knew exactly why the previous ones had left so suddenly. Some said they were dismissed without warning. Others whispered that the family tested people in ways that felt almost cruel. Clara did not have the luxury of caring about rumors. Her brother Ethan needed new shoes for school, and the rent was already 10 days late. She grabbed her coat, checked her reflection quickly in the cracked hallway mirror, and left. The Whitfield estate sat behind a long iron gate, hedges trimmed into perfect straight lines, the kind of property that made people from Clara's neighborhood feel like they had wandered into the wrong world. A black car was already waiting at the gate when she arrived, and a man stepped out to greet her. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp eyes that studied her far too closely for a driver. "You must be Miss Bennett," he said. "I'm Dan. I'll take you in." Clara nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She did not know that the man introducing himself as a driver was, in truth, Daniel Whitfield himself, the only son of the family, and the man who controlled every decision made inside that house. Daniel had learned the hard way that people showed their true character only when they believed no one important was watching. The last caregiver had smiled sweetly in front of him and his mother, then quietly stolen jewelry from Eleanor's room the moment she thought herself unseen. Daniel was done trusting resumes and polished interviews. This time, he wanted to see the truth for himself. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood polish. Daniel led Clara through a long hallway lined with portraits, then stopped outside a set of double doors. "Mrs. Whitfield is blind," he said, watching Clara's face carefully. "She lost her sight 8 years ago. She does not like to be treated like she is fragile, and she can tell within minutes if someone is only pretending to care. Many people before you have failed that test without even realizing they were being tested." Clara felt a flicker of nervousness, but she nodded firmly.
"I understand."
Daniel opened the door. Eleanor Whitfield sat near the window in a high-backed chair, her silver hair pulled into a neat twist, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She turned her head slightly at the sound of footsteps, her clouded eyes fixed on nothing in particular, yet somehow it felt as if she were studying Clara anyway. "Come closer, dear," Eleanor said. "Standing far away does neither of us any good." Clara crossed the room and knelt slightly so she was at eye level, even though Eleanor could not see her. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield. My name is Clara." "Clara," Eleanor repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Tell me, Clara, do you find it strange, talking to a woman who cannot see your face?" "No," Clara said honestly. "I think it means you listen more carefully than most people do. That's not strange. That's a gift." For a moment, the room was silent. Daniel, standing near the doorway, felt something shift in his chest. Every other candidate had either stumbled over their words in that moment or offered some hollow, rehearsed compliment. Clara's answer had come without hesitation, without pity, and without the false sweetness he had grown so tired of hearing. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Sit down, Clara. Let us talk properly." The interview stretched far longer than Daniel had expected. Eleanor asked about Clara's family, her work history, her reasons for wanting this position. Clara answered plainly, without exaggerating her skills or hiding her circumstances. She admitted she needed the income badly. She admitted she had never worked in a house this large before. She did not pretend to be someone she was not, and somehow that honesty made her seem more capable, not less. When the interview ended, Eleanor turned her face toward the doorway, toward Daniel, though she could not see him. "Dan," she said, "show Clara to the East Wing. She will start today." Daniel blinked, surprised at how quickly his mother had decided, though he understood exactly why. He had felt it too. "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield," he said. As Clara followed him out of the room, relief washed over her so strongly that her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had the job. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that things might finally turn around. Daniel led her down a corridor toward a small guest room that had been prepared for the live-in caregiver. He explained the household schedule in short, practical sentences, careful to maintain the distance of a driver speaking to new staff. But his eyes kept drifting toward her, watching the way she studied every detail of the house, not with greed or awe, but with quiet attentiveness, as if she were memorizing the layout so she would never make Eleanor feel lost or confused within her own home. "You'll want to learn where things are quickly," Daniel said. "Mrs. Whitfield likes her routines exact. She takes her tea at 4 in the afternoon, always in the blue cup, never the white one. She likes the curtains open in the morning, even though she can't see the light, because she says she can feel the warmth change in the room." Clara listened closely, nodding. "That makes sense. If I were her, I think I would want to be reminded that the world outside still exists, even if I couldn't see it." Daniel stopped walking for a moment, caught off guard by how naturally she understood something that had taken him years to learn about his own mother. "Most people don't think of it that way," he said quietly. "Most people haven't tried to imagine it," Clara replied. That evening, Clara began her duties. She helped Eleanor prepare for dinner, guiding her gently by the elbow, instead of pulling her by the wrist, the way the last caregiver had done. She described the meal on the table in simple, clear words, not with exaggerated cheerfulness, but with respect, as though Eleanor were fully capable of forming her own opinions about the food in front of her. Daniel found reasons to linger near the dining room that night, telling himself he was simply checking on his mother's comfort. In truth, he could not stop watching Clara. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel steady and safe. When Eleanor's hand trembled slightly reaching for her water glass, Clara did not rush to grab it for her. She waited, patient, letting Eleanor find it on her own, only offering a soft word of guidance if it was truly needed. "You let her do things herself," Daniel said later, when Clara stepped into the hallway for a brief moment. "Most people just take over." "She's not helpless," Clara said simply. "She's blind. Those aren't the same thing." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, something unfamiliar and unsettling. He had spent years building walls around himself, wary of anyone who came near his mother, always searching for the moment their kindness would crack and reveal something selfish underneath. But watching Clara, he found no cracks, only steadiness. As the hours passed and the house grew quiet, Daniel retreated to his study, trying to focus on the paperwork spread across his desk. But his mind kept wandering back to the woman down the hall, the one who did not know his real name, the one who had no idea that the driver she had been speaking to all day was the son who controlled her paycheck, her position, and quite possibly, without either of them realizing it yet, a part of his own heart. Late that night, unable to sleep, Daniel walked past his mother's room and paused. Through the small gap in the door, he saw Clara sitting beside Eleanor's bed, reading softly from a worn paperback novel, her voice low and warm in the dim light. Eleanor's face, usually composed and guarded, looked peaceful in a way Daniel had not seen in years. He stood there longer than he intended, watching a stranger bring comfort to his mother simply by being present, simply by caring, without expecting anything in return. Daniel Whitfield, a man who had built a reputation for being calculated and unreadable in every boardroom he entered, felt his carefully guarded heart shift for the first time in a long while. He did not know yet what he would do about it, or how he would ever explain the lie he had told her at the gate. He only knew, standing in that quiet hallway, that something important had already begun, and there would be no simple way to stop it now. He turned and walked back toward his study, but sleep did not come easily that night. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Whitfield lay awake not because of business, not because of worry over his mother's safety, but because of a woman named Clara Bennett, who had walked into his house that afternoon, believing him to be nothing more than a driver, and had somehow, without even trying, become the only thing on his mind. Outside, the city lights blinked steadily beyond the estate's tall windows, indifferent to the quiet storm beginning to build inside the Whitfield household, a storm that neither Daniel nor Clara could yet see coming, but one that would change both of their lives long before the year was through. The next morning began before the sun had fully risen, and Clara was already awake, moving quietly through the unfamiliar house so she would not disturb anyone. She wanted her first full day to be flawless. She had learned long ago that opportunities like this one did not come twice, and she refused to waste it. By the time Eleanor stirred, Clara had already laid out her clothes, prepared warm water for washing, and opened the curtains exactly as Daniel had instructed. Eleanor sat up slowly, her senses sharp despite her blindness, and smiled faintly at the sound of fabric being smoothed across the bed. "You're an early riser," Eleanor said. "I didn't want to keep you waiting," Clara replied. "Most people wait until I ring for them," Eleanor said, amused. "You already anticipated what I needed. That is rare." Clara smiled, though Eleanor could not see it. "I used to take care of my grandmother before she passed. She couldn't see very well either, near the end. I suppose old habits stay with you." Eleanor's expression softened at that, though she said nothing further. She simply reached out, found Clara's hand without hesitation, and gave it a gentle squeeze before letting go. Meanwhile, across the estate, Daniel sat in his study, reviewing reports from his company, though his concentration kept slipping. His assistant, a sharp young man named Oliver, knocked and entered with a stack of documents. "Mr. Whitfield, the quarterly figures for the downtown project are ready," Oliver said. "Also, Victor Hale called again this morning. He wants to discuss merging operations with the Ridgeview development." Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of the name. Victor Hale was a rival businessman who had circled the Whitfield company for years, always looking for a way to gain influence, always searching for a weakness he could exploit. Daniel had never trusted him, not for a single moment. "Tell him I'm not interested," Daniel said flatly. "Tell him the same thing I told him the last 3 times. Oliver hesitated. "He mentioned something odd, sir. He asked about your mother, about her health. He said he heard she has been struggling lately." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "My mother is perfectly well. Victor Hale has no business asking about her. I thought you should know," Oliver said carefully, then excused himself. Daniel leaned back in his chair, unease settling over him. Victor Hale rarely asked idle questions. If he was inquiring about Eleanor's health, there was likely a reason behind it, some scheme forming beneath the surface. Daniel made a mental note to look deeper into it later, though for now, other matters pulled at his attention just as strongly. He rose from his desk and walked toward the garden, where he had been told Clara was taking Eleanor for a short walk. He told himself he only wanted to check on his mother's comfort, but the truth sat closer to his heart than he wanted to admit. He found them near the rose bushes, Eleanor's arm looped gently through Clara's, their pace slow and unhurried. Clara was describing the garden in vivid detail, the deep red of the roses, the way the morning light caught on the dew still clinging to the leaves, the small brown bird hopping along the stone path just ahead of them. "You paint quite a picture," Eleanor said, smiling. "I like to imagine what it would be like if I couldn't see it myself," Clara said. "I think I'd want someone to describe it properly, not just say, 'It's a garden.' That feels lazy." Daniel stood a short distance away, listening, his arms crossed loosely, his expression unreadable to anyone who did not know him well. But inside, something warm and unfamiliar stirred again, the same feeling that had kept him awake the night before. He stepped forward, and Eleanor turned toward the sound. "Dan, is that you?" "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield," Daniel said, slipping easily back into the role he had created for himself. "I came to see if you needed anything." "We're managing beautifully," Eleanor said. "Clara has a gift for words. You should hear her describe the sky." Clara blushed slightly under the compliment, glancing toward Daniel for only a moment before looking away. Daniel caught the brief flicker of her gaze and felt his pulse quicken in a way that startled him. "I'm glad to hear it," Daniel said. "If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." He turned and walked back toward the house, though every step away from the garden felt heavier than it should have. Later that afternoon, while Eleanor rested, Clara took the opportunity to explore the house a little further, familiarizing herself with the layout as Daniel had suggested the day before. She wandered into the sitting room, admiring the tall bookshelves lined with worn novels, and it was there that Daniel found her. "Looking for something?" he asked. Clara startled slightly, then smiled. "Just getting to know the house. I don't want to get lost carrying Mrs. Whitfield's tea one day." Daniel chuckled, a genuine sound that surprised even him. That would be an interesting sight. They fell into an easy conversation that neither of them planned, talking about the books on the shelves, then slowly drifting into deeper territory. Clara spoke about her brother, about the sacrifices she had made to keep him fed and in school after their parents passed away. She spoke without asking for sympathy, simply stating facts, the same steady honesty Daniel had noticed the day before. "You've had a hard life," Daniel said quietly. "Everyone has something hard," Clara replied. "I just try not to let it make me bitter. Bitterness doesn't pay the bills, and it definitely doesn't help my brother sleep at night." Daniel studied her for a long moment, something in his chest tightening with an emotion he could not quite name. He thought of all the wealthy, polished people he had met throughout his life, people who complained about the smallest inconveniences, people who had never known real struggle. Clara's quiet strength stood in stark contrast to all of it, and he found himself drawn to her in a way that felt both thrilling and dangerous. "You're a strong woman, Clara," he said. "I'm just doing what I have to do," she replied simply. That evening, as the household settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Daniel found himself once again standing outside his mother's door, watching Clara help Eleanor prepare for bed. He should have walked away. He should have returned to his study and buried himself in work as he usually did. Instead, he stayed, watching the gentle way Clara tucked the blanket around his mother's shoulders, the soft laughter that passed between them as Eleanor shared some old memory from her youth. Daniel realized, standing there in the shadows of the hallway, that he was no longer simply testing Clara's character. He had crossed some invisible line, and there would be no easy way back. He had begun to care for her, deeply and quickly, in a way that terrified him because of the lie still standing between them. He knew he would have to tell her the truth eventually, but not yet. Not until he was certain of what he truly felt, and not until he understood exactly what Victor Hale's sudden interest in his mother's health might mean for all of them. For now, Daniel allowed himself one more night of watching from a distance, one more night of pretending to be simply a driver named Dan, one more night before the fragile world he had built around this lie began, inevitably, to crack. 3 weeks passed, and life inside the Whitfield estate began to settle into a new rhythm, one that felt warmer than it had in years. Eleanor laughed more often. She asked to sit in the garden longer than usual, requested new books to be read aloud, and even began humming softly to herself, while Clara brushed her hair in the mornings. A small habit that Daniel noticed the very first time he heard it drifting down the hallway. But not everyone in the house welcomed the change. Margaret Doyle, the head housekeeper who had served the Whitfield family for over 15 years, watched Clara with narrowed, calculating eyes. Margaret had grown comfortable with the previous arrangement, where caregivers came and went quickly, never gaining too much favor, never threatening the quiet control she held over the household staff. Clara's growing closeness with Eleanor unsettled her. "She's only been here a few weeks," Margaret muttered one afternoon to another staff member, Priya, as they folded linens in the laundry room. "And already Mrs. Whitfield treats her like family." "It isn't right," Priya shrugged. "Maybe she's just good at her job. Or maybe she's good at pretending," Margaret said coldly. "I've seen her type before. Sweet on the surface, but everyone wants something in a house like this." Priya said nothing more, though the words lingered uncomfortably in the air. Margaret's suspicion did not stay hidden for long. That same evening, she found an excuse to speak with Daniel directly, catching him alone in the hallway outside his study. "Mr. Whitfield," she said carefully, using his true title now that they were away from Eleanor and Clara, "I feel it is my duty to mention something. The new caregiver, Clara, has grown very close to your mother, rather quickly. I only wish to ensure the family's best interests are protected." Daniel studied Margaret's expression carefully, sensing the underlying jealousy beneath her carefully chosen words. "Are you suggesting she has done something wrong?" "Not yet," Margaret said. "But history has taught this family caution, has it not?" Daniel's jaw tightened at the memory Margaret was clearly referencing. 2 years earlier, a caregiver named Denise had worked for the family for nearly 6 months, gaining Eleanor's trust slowly and deliberately, only to disappear one night with several pieces of valuable jewelry and a small sum of cash from the household safe. Daniel had blamed himself for months afterward, furious that he had allowed his mother to be deceived so easily, furious that his own judgment had failed to see the danger in time. It was that very memory that had led him to disguise himself as a driver in the first place, determined never to make the same mistake again. "I appreciate your concern, Margaret," Daniel said evenly, "but I have been watching Clara closely myself. I have no reason to doubt her character." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, clearly unsatisfied with his answer, but she said nothing more, and excused herself. Daniel remained in the hallway a moment longer, unsettled despite his confident words. He trusted his own instincts about Clara, yet Margaret's warning, combined with Victor Hale's strange inquiries about his mother's health, left a small knot of worry tightening in his chest. That night, unable to shake his unease, Daniel decided to learn more about his mother's condition directly from her, hoping to understand why Victor Hale might be so interested. He found Eleanor sitting alone in the sitting room, her hands folded quietly in her lap while Clara prepared her evening tea in the kitchen down the hall. "Mother," Daniel said, sitting beside her, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, Dan," Eleanor said, still unaware of who truly sat beside her. "Have you spoken with anyone recently about your health? Anyone outside the household?" Eleanor's expression shifted slightly, thoughtful. "There was a call last week, actually. A man claiming to be a representative from some medical charity, asking questions about my condition, how I manage daily life, whether I feel safe living here. I found it odd, but I assumed it was simply routine outreach." Daniel's stomach tightened. That was no charity. That was Victor Hale, gathering information, likely searching for any sign of vulnerability he could later use to challenge Eleanor's independence, perhaps even her control over her share of the family company. If Victor could convince a court that Eleanor was incapable of managing her own affairs, he could push for a guardianship battle, one that would give him significant influence over the Whitfield business empire, through manipulation and legal maneuvering. "If anyone calls again asking questions like that, please let me know immediately," Daniel said carefully. Eleanor tilted her head, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Is something wrong?" "I just want to keep you safe," Daniel said. "That's all." Eleanor reached out and found his hand, patting it gently. "You worry too much, Dan, but I appreciate it." Daniel forced a small smile, grateful that his mother still could not see the tension written plainly across his face. He excused himself shortly after, his mind now fully consumed by the growing sense that Victor Hale's interest in his family was far from harmless curiosity. Later that evening, Clara found Daniel standing alone near the garden entrance, staring out at the darkening sky with a troubled expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked, stepping closer. Daniel turned, quickly masking his worry behind a calm expression. "Just business matters. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." Clara studied him for a moment, unconvinced, but she did not press further. Instead, she stood beside him quietly, looking out at the same darkening horizon. "You know," she said after a moment, "Mrs. Whitfield told me something interesting today. She said losing her sight was the hardest thing she has ever endured, harder even than losing her husband. She said the world became smaller overnight, and she had to learn to trust people completely, in a way she never had before." Daniel's throat tightened at the mention of his father, gone now for nearly 10 years, and at the accident that had taken both his father's life and his mother's sight in a single devastating moment. Eleanor rarely spoke about it, even with her own son, yet she had shared it with Clara after only a few weeks. "She trusts you a great deal," Daniel said quietly. "I don't take that lightly," Clara replied. "Trust like that is rare, especially from someone who has been hurt before." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, the moonlight catching softly against her face, and he felt the same overwhelming pull he had felt since that very first night, watching her read quietly beside his mother's bed. "Clara," he said slowly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you take this job, really, beyond the money?" Clara considered the question carefully before answering. "Because everyone deserves to be cared for properly, especially people the rest of the world tends to overlook. My grandmother used to say that the way a person treats those who cannot repay them says everything about their true character. I've never forgotten that." Daniel felt something settle deep within his chest, a quiet certainty forming that had nothing to do with his mother's safety and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. "That's a beautiful way to see the world," he said softly. "It's the only way I know how, Clara replied, smiling gently. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, neither one willing to break the fragile warmth that had settled between them. But even as Daniel allowed himself this brief moment of peace, the weight of his hidden identity pressed heavier against his conscience, and somewhere across the city, Victor Hale continued quietly assembling the pieces of a plan that would soon threaten everything the Whitfield family held dear. The following morning, Margaret's suspicion took a darker turn. While cleaning Daniel's study, she noticed an unfamiliar business card sitting on his desk, one bearing the name and logo of Victor Hale's company. Curious and eager to prove her earlier warnings had merit, she picked it up and slipped it into her apron pocket, deciding it might prove useful information to share, though she was not yet certain with whom. Unaware of the small storm quietly gathering around her, Clara continued her mornings exactly as she had before, guiding Eleanor gently through her daily routines, filling the house with warmth it had not known in years. She had no idea that a lie sat at the very foundation of her growing friendship with the man she knew only as Dan, nor did she know that outside forces were already circling the family she had come to care for so deeply, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. The scream came just after midnight, sharp and sudden, tearing through the silence of the sleeping house. Clara was awake instantly, her body moving before her mind had fully processed the sound. She rushed down the hallway toward Eleanor's room, her bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found Eleanor on the floor beside her bed, one hand pressed against her hip, her face pale and tight with pain. "Mrs. Whitfield," Clara said, dropping to her knees beside her. "I'm here. Don't move too quickly." "I got up for water," Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly, embarrassment mixing with pain. "I thought I knew the way. I always know the way." "It's all right," Clara said gently, though her mind was already racing through everything she needed to do. She checked Eleanor's hip carefully, watching for any sign of serious injury, speaking in a calm, steady voice the entire time. "Can you feel your legs properly? Any sharp pain when you try to move them?" "A dull ache," Eleanor said. "Nothing sharp." Clara nodded to herself, relief mixing with continued caution. "I'm going to call for help, and I'm going to stay right here with you the entire time. You are not alone." Down the hall, Daniel had already woken at the sound of the scream, his heart lodged somewhere in his throat as he sprinted toward his mother's room. He arrived to find Clara kneeling beside Eleanor, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders, already dialing for the family physician on the house phone. "What happened?" Daniel demanded, dropping to his knees on Eleanor's other side. "She fell, reaching for water," Clara said quickly, her focus never leaving Eleanor's face. "I don't think anything is broken, but we need Dr. Ashford here immediately to be certain." Daniel watched, momentarily frozen, as Clara continued speaking calmly to his mother, keeping her talking, keeping her distracted from the pain and fear of the moment, all while efficiently relaying information to the doctor on the phone. There was no panic in her movements, no hesitation, only quiet, focused competence. When the doctor arrived 20 minutes later, Clara stepped back only far enough to allow him to examine Eleanor properly, though she remained close, ready to assist the moment she was needed. Daniel stood near the doorway, watching the entire scene unfold, his chest tight with an emotion far more complicated than simple gratitude. "She'll be fine," Dr. Ashford announced eventually. "A bruised hip, nothing more. She was fortunate. Someone found her so quickly and kept her calm." Eleanor reached for Clara's hand as the doctor packed away his equipment. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying so calm. I was frightened, but you made it easier." "That's what I'm here for," Clara said gently. Once the doctor left, and Eleanor had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Clara stepped out into the hallway, her hands trembling now, that the adrenaline of the moment had begun to fade. Daniel followed her out, closing the door softly behind them. "Are you all right?" he asked. Clara let out a shaky breath. "I think so. It's easier to stay calm in the moment. It's afterward that it catches up with you." Daniel studied her carefully, noticing the slight tremor in her hands, the exhaustion beginning to settle into her features. Without fully thinking it through, he reached out and gently took her hand, steadying it within his own. "You did everything right tonight," he said quietly. "You kept her safe." Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, something unspoken passing between them in that quiet hallway. I was scared, she admitted softly. Scared of losing her, even though I've only known her a few weeks. You care about her a great deal already, Daniel said. I care about a lot of things I probably shouldn't let myself care about so quickly, Clara said, her eyes lingering on his for a moment longer than necessary, before she looked away, embarrassed by her own honesty. Daniel felt his heart pound in a way that had nothing to do with the earlier emergency. Standing there in the dim hallway light, holding her trembling hand, watching the quiet vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show, he understood with sudden clarity that whatever he felt for Clara was no longer simple admiration. It had grown into something deeper, something he could no longer pretend was merely curiosity about how she treated his mother. He was falling for her, completely and undeniably, and the lie he had told her that very first day at the gate now felt like a weight he could barely carry. Clara, he began softly, there's something I need to tell you. But before he could continue, Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway, drawn by the earlier commotion, her sharp eyes taking in the sight of Daniel holding Clara's hand with obvious interest. Is everything all right? Margaret asked, her tone carefully neutral, though her gaze lingered pointedly on their joined hands. Daniel released Clara's hand quickly, stepping back with practiced composure. Mrs. Whitfield had a fall. She's resting now. I see, Margaret said, her eyes flicking briefly toward Clara before settling back on Daniel. I'm glad Dan was here to help. The emphasis on his false name was subtle, but Daniel caught it immediately, along with the faint knowing look in Margaret's eyes. She suspects something, he realized with a cold jolt of unease, and if Margaret grew suspicious enough to start asking questions, it would only be a matter of time before the truth unraveled on its own, in a way far messier than Daniel could control. Thank you for checking, Margaret, he said evenly. You can return to bed. Everything is handled. Margaret nodded slowly and retreated down the hallway, though her expression made it clear she intended to keep watching closely. Once she was gone, Clara turned back to Daniel, her earlier vulnerability replaced now with quiet curiosity. What were you going to tell me? Daniel hesitated, the words he had almost spoken sitting heavy on his tongue. The moment felt fragile, and he was suddenly terrified of shattering it with a confession he was not yet ready to make, especially not while his mother lay recovering just beyond the closed door beside them. It can wait, he said instead. You should rest. It's been a long night. Clara studied him a moment longer, sensing there was more beneath the surface, but she was too exhausted to press further. Good night, Dan, she said softly, before turning and walking toward her own room. Daniel remained standing in the hallway long after she had gone, his hand still tingling faintly from where hers had rested against it only moments before. He knew now, without any remaining doubt, that he had fallen completely for Clara Bennett, and he knew, with equal certainty, that the longer he allowed his lie to stand between them, the more painful the eventual truth would become. Somewhere across the city, in a quiet office lit only by a single desk lamp, Victor Hale reviewed a folder of notes his private investigator had gathered on the Whitfield family, a small, satisfied smile forming as he read the details of Eleanor's recent fall, information that had somehow already reached him, through channels neither Daniel nor Clara yet suspected existed within their own household. The storm Daniel had sensed building for weeks was drawing closer now, and time, he realized grimly, was running out far faster than he had ever anticipated. Guilt sat heavy on Daniel's chest over the following days, following him through every meeting, every quiet moment, every time he caught himself watching Clara across the dinner table, with an affection he could no longer deny. He had built his entire relationship with her on a foundation of deception, and the longer it continued, the more he feared what would happen once the truth finally surfaced. He tried, more than once, to find the right moment to tell her. He would walk toward the garden where she sat with his mother, rehearsing the words in his mind, only to lose his nerve the instant she looked up and smiled at him. Her trust felt like something fragile and precious, and he could not bring himself to risk shattering it carelessly. Meanwhile, Margaret's suspicions had only deepened. The business card she had taken from Daniel's desk sat tucked inside her apron for days before curiosity finally got the better of her. She recognized the name Victor Hale from local newspapers, a businessman often mentioned alongside stories of aggressive company takeovers and legal disputes. Unsure what connection he might have to the Whitfield family, and eager to prove her usefulness, Margaret made a decision that would set dangerous events into motion. She placed a call to the number listed on the card. "Mr. Hale's office," a smooth voice answered. "I have information about the Whitfield family that Mr. Hale may find valuable," Margaret said carefully, "regarding Mrs. Whitfield's health and the new caregiver working in the household." Within the hour, Margaret found herself seated across from Victor Hale himself, in a quiet cafe, several blocks from the estate, a man with silver hair, tailored clothing, and a calm, calculating demeanor that immediately put her on edge, though she pressed forward anyway, driven by resentment toward Clara's growing influence within the household she had once controlled so completely. "Tell me everything," Victor said, folding his hands on the table. Margaret explained what she had witnessed: Eleanor's recent fall, the closeness developing between the caregiver and the man the household staff knew as Dan, the strange dynamic she could not quite understand, but sensed was somehow important. Victor listened carefully, his expression giving away little, though internally, pieces of a plan were already falling into place. He had been searching for an opening to challenge Eleanor's independent control over her share of the Whitfield company for months, hoping to use concerns about her health and safety to push for a legal guardianship that would ultimately place decision-making power into more convenient hands, his own included, through business arrangements he had quietly built with a distant Whitfield cousin, eager for influence. If Eleanor's caregiver could be convinced to support a narrative of declining health and unsafe living conditions, it would strengthen his case considerably. "I need you to arrange a meeting with the caregiver," Victor said finally. "Clara, was it?" Margaret hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing her face despite her earlier resentment. "What exactly are you planning to do?" "Nothing that concerns you," Victor said smoothly. "I simply want to speak with her, perhaps offer her an opportunity that benefits everyone involved." Margaret nodded slowly, though a small knot of guilt tightened in her stomach as she agreed to help arrange the meeting, uncertain now whether she had made a mistake by involving herself in something far larger than simple household gossip. 3 days later, under the guise of running errands in town, Clara received an unexpected phone call from an unknown number. "Miss Bennet," a smooth voice said, "my name is Victor Hale. I wonder if you might have a few minutes to speak with me about the Whitfield family. It concerns Mrs. Whitfield's well-being, and I believe it would benefit you greatly to hear what I have to say." Confused but cautious, Clara agreed to meet him at a small cafe near the market square, curiosity mixing uneasily with instinctive wariness. Victor greeted her warmly when she arrived, gesturing for her to sit across from him, his manner polished and disarming. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Bennet. I understand you've grown quite close to Eleanor Whitfield recently. I care about her well-being." "Yes," Clara said carefully. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "I am concerned about Mrs. Whitfield's safety," Victor said smoothly. "Living alone in such a large estate, at her age, with her condition, I believe she would be far better cared for in a more supportive environment, one with proper medical oversight." Clara's brow furrowed slightly. "She isn't alone. She has a full household staff, and I'm with her nearly every hour of the day." "Of course," Victor said, waving a dismissive hand. "But accidents happen, do they not? I understand there was a recent fall." Clara's stomach twisted uncomfortably. How could this man possibly know about Eleanor's fall? She had told no one outside the household. "How did you know about that?" she asked carefully. Victor's smile did not waver. "I have many connections, Miss Bennet. That is not important right now. What is important is this. I am prepared to offer you a significant sum of money, far more than the Whitfield family currently pays you, in exchange for your honest testimony regarding Mrs. Whitfield's declining safety at home. Simply confirm what any reasonable person can already see, that she requires more structured care than her current household provides." Clara's expression hardened as understanding dawned. "You want me to lie about her condition?" "Not lie," Victor said smoothly. "Simply emphasize certain truths that benefit her long-term well-being." "Her long-term well-being," Clara repeated slowly, "or your business interests?" Victor's calm expression flickered slightly, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. "You misunderstand my intentions, Miss Bennet." "I understand them perfectly," Clara said, rising from her seat. anger and disgust rising sharply within her chest. Mrs. Whitfield is one of the strongest, most capable women I have ever met. She does not need to be pushed out of her own home so that someone can profit from her vulnerability. I won't help you do that to her. Think carefully before refusing, Victor said, his tone shifting slightly, colder now beneath the polished surface. This offer will not remain available forever, and opportunities like this rarely come twice for someone in your financial circumstances. Clara's hands trembled slightly with restrained anger, but her voice remained steady. I don't care how much money you offer. Some things aren't for sale. She turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back, her heart pounding furiously the entire way home. Anger and fear tangled together as she processed exactly what had just happened. Someone was actively working against the Whitfield family, someone with enough information to know intimate details about Eleanor's private life, and Clara had no idea how deep this threat truly ran, or who else within the household might already be involved. She considered telling Daniel immediately, but hesitated, unsure how much she could trust anyone within that house, given how easily Victor Hale seemed to know things that should have remained private. Instead, she decided to watch carefully, to gather more information, before raising an alarm that might put Eleanor at greater risk if handled carelessly. That evening, Clara went about her duties with Eleanor, exactly as she always had, describing the sunset through the sitting room window, helping her settle comfortably for the night, giving no indication of the unsettling meeting that had taken place earlier that day. But beneath her calm exterior, worry gnawed steadily at her thoughts. Daniel noticed the subtle change in her demeanor, almost immediately when he passed her in the hallway later that night. You seem distracted, he observed. Just tired, Clara said, forcing a small smile. Long day. Daniel studied her a moment longer, sensing something deeper beneath her words. But he did not press the issue, uncertain of his own right to ask, given the lie still standing unresolved between them. Unbeknownst to either of them, Margaret watched their brief exchange from a distance, guilt weighing increasingly heavy on her conscience, as she began to realize the magnitude of what she had unknowingly set into motion by reaching out to Victor Hale in the first place. She had wanted only to protect what she considered her rightful place within the household, never intending to expose the family she had served for 15 years to genuine danger. As the house settled into another uneasy night, 3 separate threads of tension pulled tighter around the Whitfield estate. Daniel's unresolved lie, Clara's unspoken encounter with Victor Hale, and Margaret's growing guilt over the consequences of her own jealousy. Somewhere beneath the surface of quiet domestic routine, a storm continued gathering, one that would soon force every hidden truth into the open, whether any of them were ready for it or not. In the days following her unsettling meeting with Victor Hale, Clara found herself paying closer attention to details she had previously overlooked within the Whitfield household, small inconsistencies that had never registered as important before, but now nagged persistently at the edges of her mind. She noticed how the other staff members deferred to Dan in ways that seemed unusual for a driver, lowering their eyes slightly when he passed, rushing to complete tasks the moment he entered a room, treating his opinions with a weight that seemed disproportionate to his supposed position. She noticed how comfortably he moved through Daniel Whitfield's private study, how he seemed to know intimate details about the family's financial matters that a simple driver would have no reason to understand. One afternoon, while organizing books in the sitting room, Clara found a folded letter that had slipped between the cushions of the reading chair, addressed formally to Mr. Daniel Whitfield from a law firm regarding estate matters. Her brow furrowed as she stared at the name, turning the envelope over in her hands, a strange unease settling low in her stomach. She told herself there could be a simple explanation. Perhaps Dan shared the family surname coincidentally. Perhaps the letter belonged to someone else entirely and had simply ended up misplaced. But the more she thought about it, replaying small moments from the past several weeks, the more the pieces began arranging themselves into an uncomfortable pattern she had somehow failed to notice before. That evening, she found an opportunity to ask Priya, one of the younger household staff members, a few careful questions while they folded laundry together in the small utility room. How long has Dan worked here? Clara asked casually. Priya glanced up, slightly startled by the question. Dan? He's not exactly staff, is he? Clara's heart skipped. What do you mean? Priya hesitated, clearly uncertain whether she should say more, glancing toward the doorway as though checking for anyone listening. I probably shouldn't say anything. It's not really my place. Please, Priya, Clara said gently. I just want to understand the household better. I don't want to accidentally overstep any boundaries. Priya sighed, weighing her loyalty against Clara's obvious sincerity. He's Mrs. Whitfield's son, she said finally, quietly. Daniel Whitfield. He runs the entire family company. I don't know why he introduced himself to you as the driver, but that's who he really is. Clara stood frozen for a long moment, the laundry forgotten in her hands, her mind racing to process the revelation. Every gentle conversation, every quiet moment shared beside the garden, every instance of comfort she had felt in his presence, all of it had been built upon a lie she never could have guessed. Please don't tell him I said anything, Priya added quickly, worry crossing her face. I really shouldn't have. I won't, Clara said, her voice tight with restrained emotion. Thank you for telling me the truth. She excused herself and walked quickly to her room, closing the door behind her, sitting heavily on the edge of her narrow bed as anger, hurt, and confusion swirled together inside her chest. Why would he lie about something so significant? What had he been testing her for, all these weeks, allowing her to believe he was simply a household driver, while secretly holding power over her entire position within the family? She thought immediately of Victor Hale's words in the cafe, his uncanny knowledge of private household matters, and a new, more troubling thought began to form. Had Daniel been testing her loyalty for some other purpose entirely? Was there some connection between his deception and the strange offer Victor Hale had made her, some larger scheme she had unknowingly wandered into the middle of? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Clara? Daniel's voice called gently from the hallway. Is everything all right? You left the laundry room rather suddenly. Clara took a steadying breath, composing herself before opening the door, though her expression remained carefully guarded. I'm fine, just tired. Daniel studied her closely, sensing immediately that something had shifted, though he could not identify exactly what. You seem upset. I'm fine, Dan, Clara said, though the name felt strange and bitter on her tongue now, knowing what she knew. Daniel hesitated, wanting desperately to ask what was truly bothering her, but Clara's guarded expression made it clear she was not ready to share whatever weighed on her mind. If you need anything, I'm here, he said softly, before reluctantly stepping back and allowing her to close the door. Alone once more, Clara pressed her back against the closed door, closing her eyes as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. She needed time to think clearly before confronting him, time to decide whether she could trust anyone within this household at all, especially given the unsettling proposal Victor Hale had made only days earlier. Meanwhile, Victor Hale's pressure on Clara had not ended with their cafe meeting. 2 days later, she received another unexpected phone call, this time far more direct in its intentions. Miss Bennett, Victor said, his voice smooth but firm. I understand you declined my earlier offer. I respect your principles, truly, but I feel obligated to mention something else that may change your perspective. I already told you my answer, Clara said, her guard immediately rising. Your brother, Ethan, attends Lincoln High School, does he not? I understand he has been performing quite well academically, with hopes of a scholarship to a rather competitive university program. Clara's blood ran cold. How do you know about my brother? I make it my business to know important details, Victor said calmly. Scholarship committees can be unpredictable, Miss Bennett. Recommendations carry significant weight, and I happen to have connections within several relevant institutions. It would be unfortunate if certain doors closed unexpectedly for your brother, simply because his sister refused to cooperate on a matter that would ultimately benefit everyone involved, Eleanor Whitfield included. Clara's hands trembled with barely controlled fury. Are you threatening my brother's future to force me into helping you? I prefer to think of it as encouraging you to consider all available options carefully, Victor said smoothly. Take a few more days to think it over, Miss Bennett. I believe you will find my offer far more reasonable upon further reflection. He ended the call before Clara could respond, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, phone clutched tightly in her trembling hand, fear and anger colliding violently within her chest. She had already discovered that the man she had grown to trust and care for deeply had been lying to her about his true identity from the very first day they met. Now she faced a dangerous stranger, threatening her brother's future, unless she betrayed the very family she had come to love. Clara felt more alone in that moment than she had in years, uncertain who she could trust, uncertain what to do next, caught between a painful discovery and a threat too dangerous to ignore. She knew she needed to make a decision soon, before the pressure building around her from every direction finally became impossible to bear alone. That night, she sat awake long after the household had gone quiet, staring at the small photograph of her brother she kept tucked inside her wallet, trying desperately to find clarity amid the chaos now swirling relentlessly through her mind. By morning, Clara had made her decision. She could not continue pretending everything was normal, while a lie sat unspoken between herself and the man she had come to care for so deeply, especially not while a stranger threatened her brother's future from the shadows. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She found Daniel in his study shortly after breakfast, sorting through papers with the quiet focus he always carried when handling business matters. He looked up when she entered, immediately sensing the seriousness in her expression. "Clara, is something wrong?" "I know who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "Daniel Whitfield, not a driver. The son who owns this entire estate, who controls this entire company. I know you lied to me from the very first day we met." Daniel's face went pale, the papers in his hands forgotten, as the weight of her words settled over him. He had known this moment would come eventually, had rehearsed countless versions of this exact confession in his mind, yet standing here now, facing her hurt and anger directly, every prepared explanation seemed to abandon him entirely. "Clara, I can explain." "Then explain," she said, crossing her arms tightly, holding back the emotion threatening to break through her composed exterior. "Explain why you thought it was acceptable to deceive me for weeks. Explain why you let me believe things about you that weren't true, while I trusted you with things I've never told anyone." Daniel set down the papers and stepped around his desk, his expression pained. "I never meant to hurt you. When you first arrived, I only wanted to see how you would treat my mother, when you thought no one important was watching. Our family has been betrayed before, badly, by someone we trusted completely. I couldn't risk that happening again, not with my mother's safety and well-being at stake. So you tested me," Clara said, her voice tight. "You watched me, judged me, all while pretending to be someone you're not." "At first, yes," Daniel admitted quietly. "But it stopped being simply a test, very quickly, Clara. The way you cared for my mother, the honesty in everything you said and did, it changed something in me. I fell for you, completely, and by the time I realized how deeply I cared for you, I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing you entirely." Clara's eyes stung with unshed tears, anger and hurt tangled together with an undeniable ache of affection she could not simply erase, no matter how betrayed she felt. "You should have told me the moment you realized your feelings were becoming real. Instead, you let me keep believing a lie, every single day." "You're right," Daniel said softly. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I understand, if you can't forgive me for that." Before Clara could respond, her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She hesitated, then pulled it out, her face draining of color, as she read the message displayed on the screen. "What is it?" Daniel asked, immediately noticing the shift in her expression. "It's Victor Hale," Clara said, her voice trembling now with a fear that overshadowed even her anger toward Daniel. "He's been pressuring me for days, offering money for false testimony against your mother's ability to live independently. When I refused, he threatened my brother's scholarship opportunities. This message says he's moving forward with legal action today, using a signed statement from someone inside this household claiming your mother is unsafe and unfit to manage her own affairs." Daniel's expression hardened instantly, all traces of guilt replaced suddenly by sharp, focused alarm. "Victor Hale is behind this?" "He knew about your mother's fall before I told anyone outside this house," Clara said. "Someone here has been feeding him information." Realization struck Daniel almost immediately. Margaret. As if summoned by her name, Margaret appeared in the doorway of the study, her face pale and drawn, clearly having overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation had spiraled far beyond what she ever intended. "Mr. Whitfield," she said quietly, using his true name openly now that pretense no longer mattered. "I need to speak with you. I made a terrible mistake." Daniel turned toward her sharply. You gave Victor Hale information about my family. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, shame etched deeply across her features. I found his business card on your desk weeks ago. I was foolish, jealous of how quickly Clara had gained your mother's trust, and I contacted him without understanding the danger I was inviting into this house. I told him about the fall, about Clara's closeness with your mother. I never imagined he would use it to threaten anyone. What exactly have you told him since then? Daniel demanded. Nothing more, Margaret insisted quickly. I swear it. But he has been asking me questions, pressuring me for details about your mother's daily routines, her memory, anything that might suggest she struggles with independent living. I refused to give him anything further once I realized what he truly intended. Daniel's mind raced, piecing together the full scope of Victor Hale's scheme. If Victor had gathered enough information to construct a convincing legal case questioning Eleanor's competency, combined with a signed statement from someone claiming first-hand knowledge of her declining safety, he could potentially force a guardianship hearing, one that could strip Eleanor of control over her own affairs, and grant significant influence to Victor through his connections with a distant, ambitious Whitfield relative. How soon is he planning to file? Daniel asked urgently. The message said today, Clara said, checking her phone again. He's requesting an emergency hearing based on urgent safety concerns. Daniel's jaw tightened with fierce determination. Then we need to move faster than he does. Despite the raw hurt still lingering between them, Clara found herself instinctively stepping forward, ready to help protect the woman who had shown her nothing but warmth and trust since the very first day they met. What can I do? Daniel looked at her, gratitude and lingering guilt mixing openly across his face. I need you to write down everything Victor Hale said to you, every detail, every threat. If he tries to build a legal case using manipulated information, we need solid proof of his actual intentions to counter it. I'll do it right now, Clara said firmly. Margaret stepped forward as well, her voice trembling but resolute. I'll testify to what I did, and what I heard him say about his true motivations. I know I have no right to ask for your trust after what I've done, but I want to help fix this. Daniel nodded slowly, setting aside his anger toward Margaret for the moment, recognizing that time was far too precious to waste on assigning blame when his mother's independence and safety hung dangerously in the balance. Thank you, both of you, he said. We'll need to move quickly. I'm calling our family lawyer immediately. As Daniel reached for his phone, Clara paused at the doorway, looking back at him with an expression that carried both lingering hurt and unmistakable resolve. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you, she said quietly. But your mother doesn't deserve to suffer because of Victor Hale's greed, and I won't let that happen, regardless of what's happened between us. I understand, Daniel said softly. Thank you for staying to help her, even now. Clara nodded once, then hurried off to write down every detail she could remember from her encounters with Victor Hale, determination replacing the uncertainty that had haunted her through the long, sleepless night before. Within the hour, the household that had spent weeks settling into gentle, peaceful routines found itself transformed into a hub of urgent activity, phone calls flying between Daniel's study and the family's legal team, Margaret nervously gathering her own written statement, Clara compiling every detail of Victor Hale's threats with methodical precision, despite the emotional turmoil still churning beneath her focused exterior. Eleanor, unaware of the storm gathering around her, sat quietly in the sitting room, humming softly to herself, entirely unaware that her independence, her home, and the fragile new happiness building within her household all hung precariously in the balance, dependent now on how quickly the people who cared for her could move against a threat none of them had seen coming quite this fast, or quite this close. By early afternoon, the family lawyer, a composed woman named Vanessa Cole, arrived at the estate carrying a leather briefcase and an expression of calm authority that settled some of the tension crackling through the household. She listened carefully as Daniel explained the situation, occasionally jotting notes, her expression sharpening as the full scope of Victor Hale's scheme became clear. This is a serious accusation, Vanessa said finally. If Victor Hale attempts to file for an emergency guardianship hearing based on fabricated safety concerns, we need overwhelming evidence proving Eleanor's continued independence and capability, along with clear documentation of his attempts to manipulate witnesses through bribery and threats. I have written statements from both Clara and Margaret, Daniel said, sliding the documents across the desk. Vanessa reviewed them carefully, nodding slowly, as she read through Clara's detailed account of Victor's offer and subsequent threats against her brother's scholarship opportunities. This is helpful, but written statements alone may not be enough if he brings his own fabricated evidence. We'll need Eleanor evaluated by an independent physician immediately, someone with no prior connection to this family, who can provide an unbiased assessment of her cognitive and physical capability. I'll arrange it today, Daniel said. As the planning continued, Daniel realized there remained one crucial truth he had yet to address, one that could no longer wait, given how quickly events were unfolding. He excused himself from the meeting and made his way to the sitting room, where Eleanor sat quietly, unaware of the danger circling her household. "Mother," Daniel said gently, sitting beside her, "there's something important I need to tell you." Eleanor turned her face toward him, sensing immediately the gravity in his tone. "You sound troubled, Dan." Daniel took a steadying breath. "That's actually part of what I need to explain. My name isn't Dan, it's Daniel. I'm your son." Eleanor's expression shifted slowly from confusion to quiet astonishment, her hands stilling in her lap. "Daniel," she repeated softly, as though testing the truth of the word. "You've been pretending to be a driver this entire time. I wanted to see how a caregiver would treat you when they believed no one important was watching," Daniel admitted. "After what happened with Denise, I couldn't bear the thought of being deceived again, of you being hurt again. I'm sorry, Mother. I should have trusted you enough to include you in my reasoning from the beginning." To his surprise, rather than anger, a small, knowing smile spread across Eleanor's face. "I suspected something, you know. Mothers often do, even blind ones. Something about the way you spoke, the careful way you avoided certain questions. I simply chose not to press the matter, curious to see where it might lead." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by her calm acceptance. "You aren't upset?" "I understand why you did it," Eleanor said gently, "though I hope you've learned that trust built on deception, however well-intentioned, always carries a cost eventually. Has it cost you something with Clara?" Daniel's expression fell slightly. "She knows the truth now. She's hurt, understandably. I'm not certain she'll forgive me." Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it with quiet reassurance. "Clara has shown remarkable strength and integrity since the very first day she arrived in this house. If your feelings for her are genuine, and I believe they are, given how differently you've spoken about her these past weeks, then give her time, and give her honesty from this moment forward. That is all any of us can offer the people we care about." Daniel nodded, grateful for his mother's steady wisdom, even amid the chaos surrounding them. "There's something else you need to know," he continued. "A man named Victor Hale has been attempting to use concerns about your health and independence to challenge your legal competency. He's been gathering information, pressuring Clara for false testimony, threatening her brother's future when she refused. He may attempt to file for emergency guardianship today." Eleanor's expression hardened, her earlier warmth replaced by fierce, quiet resolve. "That man has circled this family like a vulture for years, always searching for weakness. I will not allow him to use my blindness as an excuse to steal what remains of my independence." "We're already working to counter him," Daniel assured her. "Vanessa is preparing our defense now, and we'll have an independent doctor evaluate you as soon as possible to confirm your continued capability." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "And Daniel, I want to speak with Clara myself, once things have settled. She deserves to hear directly from me how much her honesty and care have meant to this family, regardless of whatever happened between the two of you." "I'll make sure that happens," Daniel promised. Meanwhile, down the hallway, Clara sat alone in her room, finishing the final details of her written statement, her emotions still raw from the earlier confrontation with Daniel. Despite her hurt, she found herself unable to abandon the family now, not while Eleanor faced such a serious threat to her independence and safety. She told herself she was staying only for Eleanor's sake, yet a quiet, persistent part of her heart knew the truth ran deeper than simple loyalty to her employer. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Priya standing nervously in the hallway. "I wanted to apologize," Priya said quietly, "for telling you about Daniel's identity so bluntly. I didn't think about how much it might hurt you to find out that way." "You did the right thing," Clara said gently. "I needed to know the truth, however it came to me." Priya hesitated, then added carefully, "For what it's worth, I've worked in this house for 2 years, and I've never seen Mr. Whitfield look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever mistake he made, I don't think it came from a place of cruelty." Clara offered a small, tired smile, though the ache in her chest remained unresolved. "Thank you, Priya. I appreciate you telling me that." As evening approached, the household continued its urgent preparations. Phone calls exchanged with Vanessa Cole's office, an independent physician scheduled for the following morning, written statements finalized and secured. Despite the underlying tension still lingering between Daniel and Clara, both remained focused entirely on protecting Eleanor from the threat closing in around them. Neither of them yet knew that Victor Hale, growing impatient with Clara's refusal and sensing his window of opportunity narrowing, had already decided to escalate his plans far beyond simple legal maneuvering, setting into motion a bolder, more urgent scheme that would force the entire Whitfield household into its most dangerous night yet. Night had barely settled over the estate when the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, echoing through the quiet halls. Clara, still awake reviewing details with Margaret in the kitchen, felt an immediate prickle of unease. "Are we expecting anyone?" Margaret asked. "Not that I know of," Clara said, already moving toward the front hall. She arrived just as one of the household staff opened the door to reveal 2 unfamiliar men in dark suits, one carrying a clipboard, the other holding a folder of official-looking documents. "Good evening," the man with the clipboard said smoothly. "We're here on behalf of the County Wellness Office. We received a report expressing urgent concern for Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield's safety and well-being. We need to conduct an immediate welfare check." Clara's instincts flared instantly. Something about the timing, the late hour, the unfamiliar faces, felt deeply wrong. "May I see identification, please?" The man hesitated only slightly before producing a laminated badge that looked official enough at a glance, though Clara noticed the printing seemed slightly uneven, the kind of detail easy to overlook unless someone was looking closely. "I'll need to inform Mr. Whitfield before anyone proceeds further," Clara said firmly, stepping slightly to block the doorway. "That won't be necessary," the second man said, his tone sharpening. "This is a legally mandated check. Delaying it could result in complications for the family." Clara's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I'm not delaying anything. I'm simply informing the homeowner that visitors have arrived. That is standard practice in any household." Before the men could respond further, Daniel appeared behind her, drawn by the tension in her voice, carrying down the hallway. He took one look at the 2 strangers and immediately recognized the manipulation tactic for what it was. "Gentlemen," Daniel said coolly, "if you're here on official county business, you'll have no objection to my lawyer verifying your credentials directly with your office before you proceed any further into my home." The men exchanged a brief, uneasy glance, their earlier confidence faltering slightly under Daniel's calm but unwavering scrutiny. "That's an unusual request," the first man said. "It's a reasonable one," Daniel replied evenly. "Please wait here." He stepped back just far enough to call Vanessa Cole directly, keeping his eyes fixed on the 2 men the entire time. Within minutes, Vanessa confirmed exactly what Daniel had already suspected. No legitimate welfare check had been scheduled or authorized through any county office that evening. "These men are not who they claim to be," Daniel said firmly, stepping fully into the doorway now, his expression hardening. "I suggest you leave immediately, before I contact the actual authorities regarding impersonation of county officials." The 2 men, recognizing that their scheme had unraveled, retreated quickly toward a waiting car, parked just beyond the estate's gate, disappearing into the darkness without further confrontation. Clara let out a shaky breath once the door closed firmly behind them, adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Victor Hale sent them, didn't he? Trying to force some kind of unauthorized evaluation, or perhaps trying to intimidate your mother directly?" "Almost certainly," Daniel said grimly. "He's growing desperate, which means he knows his legal options are narrowing. That's actually good news for us, in a strange way. It means our defense is working." Clara nodded slowly, though the fear of the encounter still lingered in her chest. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen again tonight." "I'll arrange additional security immediately," Daniel said, already reaching for his phone. As he made the necessary calls, Clara made her way to Eleanor's room, wanting to check on her personally despite the late hour, uncertain whether the commotion downstairs had woken her. She found Eleanor sitting up in bed, alert, and clearly aware that something significant had just occurred. "I heard voices," Eleanor said. "Tell me what happened." Clara explained the situation carefully, watching Eleanor's expression shift from concern to quiet, fierce determination as she listened. "That man will not intimidate me in my own home," Eleanor said firmly once Clara finished. "I have survived far greater hardships than a greedy businessman's schemes. Daniel is already arranging additional security," Clara assured her, "and Vanessa believes our case against him is growing stronger by the hour." Eleanor reached out, finding Clara's hand with practiced ease. "Thank you, Clara, for standing at that door tonight, for refusing his earlier offer, despite the danger it clearly placed you in, with your brother's future. I know that decision cost you a great deal of fear and uncertainty." "I couldn't betray you," Clara said softly, "not for any amount of money." Eleanor smiled gently, though her clouded eyes remained fixed, somewhere just beyond Clara's face. "I want you to know something, dear. I may not be able to see your expressions, but I have learned to read people through their voice, their actions, the quality of their patience. And what I have seen in you these past weeks is a rare and genuine kindness, the kind that cannot be bought or manufactured." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, the emotional weight of the past several days finally beginning to surface. "Thank you for trusting me, even now." "I have one more thing to say," Eleanor continued gently, "about my son." Clara's breath caught slightly. "Mrs. Whitfield, I don't think—" "Please, let an old woman speak," Eleanor said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Daniel has carried the weight of protecting this family since his father passed away, long before he was truly ready for such responsibility. The betrayal we suffered with Denise wounded him more deeply than he has ever admitted, even to me. His decision to test you through deception was wrong, and he knows that now. But I have watched him these past weeks, listened to the way his voice changes whenever he speaks of you, and I believe his feelings for you are genuine, however clumsily he arrived at expressing them." Clara remained silent, absorbing Eleanor's words carefully, the ache of hurt still present, but softened now by the older woman's gentle wisdom. "I'm not asking you to forgive him tonight," Eleanor added. "Only to remain open to the possibility, when you feel ready. Life is far too short to let a well-intentioned mistake destroy something rare and valuable." Clara squeezed Eleanor's hand gently, unable to fully voice the swirl of emotions building within her chest. "I'll think about what you've said. That's all I ask," Eleanor said warmly. Down the hall, Daniel finished his security arrangements and stood alone for a moment, in the quiet study. Exhaustion and worry etched across his features. The confrontation with Victor Hale's men had confirmed just how far the man was willing to go to seize control of his family's affairs, and Daniel understood clearly now that the coming days would require every ounce of strength and unity the household could gather. He thought of Clara standing firmly at the front door, refusing to back down despite clear danger, protecting his mother with the same quiet determination she had shown from the very first day she arrived. Whatever mistakes he had made in deceiving her, he knew with absolute certainty now that his feelings for her were real, and he intended to prove that to her, patiently and honestly, for as long as it took to earn back her trust. The night eventually settled into an uneasy calm, the immediate danger averted for now, though everyone within the Whitfield household understood clearly that Victor Hale's desperation made him more dangerous, not less, and the final confrontation still waited somewhere close on the horizon. The following morning brought a wave of activity that would finally determine the fate of the Whitfield family's future. Dr. Anthony Reyes, the independent physician Vanessa had arranged, arrived promptly at 9 to conduct a thorough evaluation of Eleanor's physical and cognitive health. Eleanor answered every question with sharp clarity, her wit and steady memory leaving no room for doubt about her continued independence and capability. "She's remarkably healthy for her age," Dr. Reyes told Daniel and Vanessa afterward. "Her blindness presents physical limitations certainly, but her cognitive function is entirely intact. There is absolutely no medical basis for questioning her competency to manage her own affairs." Armed with this evaluation, along with the written statements from Clara and Margaret detailing Victor Hale's attempts at bribery and intimidation, Vanessa moved quickly to file a formal complaint against him with the county authorities, citing impersonation of officials, witness tampering, and attempted extortion. By early afternoon, word arrived that Victor Hale's emergency guardianship filing had been dismissed entirely, the judge citing insufficient evidence and troubling irregularities in how the petition had been assembled. Facing the mounting legal complaint against him, along with the collapse of his scheme, Victor Hale's business associates quickly distanced themselves from the unfolding scandal, and within days, his reputation across the city's business community lay in ruins, his ambitions toward the Whitfield Company permanently extinguished. Relief swept through the household like a long-awaited breath of fresh air. Eleanor celebrated quietly, with a simple cup of tea in the garden, insisting that Clara sit beside her rather than serve her from a distance, treating her now, not merely as a caregiver, but as someone far closer to family. Yet despite the victory against Victor Hale, tension remained unresolved between Daniel and Clara. Though they had worked seamlessly together throughout the crisis, the earlier hurt from his deception still lingered beneath the surface of their interactions, neither one quite certain how to bridge the distance that remained. One evening, several days after the danger had fully passed, Daniel found Clara sitting alone in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. "May I sit with you?" he asked quietly. Clara glanced up, studying him for a long moment before nodding. Daniel settled beside her, silence stretching comfortably between them for a while before he finally spoke. "I know I hurt you," he said softly, "and I know an apology alone cannot undo the weeks of deception you endured because of my choices. But I want you to know that everything else, every conversation, every moment we shared, was real. My feelings for you grew from genuine admiration, not from any calculated test." Clara remained quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade slowly across the horizon. "I understand why you did what you did, Daniel. The betrayal your family suffered before clearly left deep wounds. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I can't simply pretend the hurt didn't happen." "I don't expect you to," Daniel said gently. "I only hope you'll allow me the chance to earn that trust back properly, honestly, for as long as it takes." Clara turned to look at him fully then, searching his face for any trace of the same calculated distance she had once feared to find him. Instead, she found only quiet sincerity, patient and unguarded. "I care about you, Daniel," she admitted softly. "Despite everything, that hasn't changed. But I need honesty from you moving forward. Real honesty, not carefully managed truths. You'll have it," Daniel promised. "Completely." A gentle smile finally broke across Clara's face, the first genuine one she had allowed herself since discovering the truth about his identity. "Then perhaps we can start again, properly this time. No disguises, no hidden names." "I would like that very much," Daniel said, warmth spreading through his chest, as relief and happiness mingled together freely, for the first time in days. Over the following weeks, their relationship rebuilt itself, slowly and carefully, grounded now in complete honesty, rather than the fragile deception that had shaped its beginning. Daniel made a point of including Clara openly in family matters, introducing her properly to business associates and old family friends, no longer hiding behind any false identity. Eleanor watched their growing bond with quiet, contented happiness, delighted to witness her son finally allowing himself the vulnerability of genuine love. Margaret, having learned a difficult lesson about the dangers of jealousy and hasty judgment, worked diligently over the following months to rebuild trust within the household, eventually forming an unexpected friendship with Clara, built on mutual respect rather than earlier suspicion. Nearly a year after Clara had first walked through the estate's iron gates, nervous and uncertain about her future, Daniel invited her to the same garden where they had shared so many quiet moments together. Eleanor sat nearby, a knowing smile resting gently on her face, having been let in on Daniel's plans well in advance. "Clara," Daniel said, taking her hands gently in his own, "you walked into this house not knowing the truth about who I was, yet you showed my mother, and eventually me, more genuine kindness and honesty than anyone I have ever known. I don't want to spend another day without you, fully and openly beside me." He knelt down, producing a small velvet box, and Clara's breath caught as understanding dawned across her face. "Will you marry me, Clara Bennett?" Daniel asked softly. "Completely, honestly, without any disguises standing between us ever again?" Tears of joy filled Clara's eyes as she nodded, unable to find words steady enough to match the overwhelming happiness swelling within her chest. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes, Daniel, I will." Eleanor, hearing the soft sounds of celebration nearby, smiled warmly toward the direction of their voices, her heart full of gratitude for the woman who had walked into her life during one of its most vulnerable chapters, and had chosen, again and again, to answer kindness with kindness and honesty with honesty. In the months that followed, the Whitfield estate transformed from a house guarded carefully against betrayal into a home filled once more with warmth, laughter, and trust. Clara continued caring for Eleanor, though now as a beloved daughter, rather than simply an employee, and Daniel finally allowed himself to release the guarded caution that had shaped so much of his life since his father's passing. What began as a quiet test of character, born from fear and past betrayal, had ultimately blossomed into a love built upon the very qualities Daniel had hoped to find all along: patience, honesty, and a kindness that asked for nothing in return. And in the end, that was precisely what made their story, and their love, endure.